I'm up here, got all this stuff set to go. We should be good. Let me adjust this over. I'm recording right now. Okay, here we go. We're going to go ahead and get started. Chapter 4 is what I had you read for today. It focused on the U.S. Constitution, so our daily objective for today is to review issues with the AOC and the formation of the U.S. Constitution. Class, we're going to review issues with the AOC and the formation of the U.S. Constitution. Okay, I want to start out today by talking about state constitutions. That's the first thing we're going to talk about when we talk about the U.S. Constitution. So number one is state constitutions. Few key things here. Some of the states kept their old constitutions. Which were basically provincial assemblies, meaning provinces, all right? Key things to keep in mind here were that there was 150 years of colonial self-government for a lot of these states, so they were kind of used to this by now. And there was also an element of self-government, meaning that their just powers were from the consent of the governed. All right, just powers from the consent of the governed. Let's talk about the methods of state governments. And primarily they were written constitutions. All right. They were written by the provincial assemblies. And in Massachusetts, we had, of course, for their method of governing state constitutions, there was town meetings, right? And state conventions. Let's talk about the format here of how this all worked. We have the Declaration of Independence. Okay, that's declared for all the states. And you have that, plus citizens' rights, which were very important during this time, plus an executive and a legislative branch that are present in the within each state. One of the goals here, when looking at what was going on, remember we had just come off of this war, or actually we were in a war with a king, which we felt was a tyrant. So a lot of these state constitutions try to weaken the executive branch or the governors. Voting during this time was white, male property owners. So even though we were fighting, and we always talk about the Declaration of Independence says this, oh, the Constitution says this, oh, in actuality, it wasn't nearly as liberal of an interpretation as we take into account today. Okay. Another important thing about state constitutions you have to know, because this is important if it comes to a FRQ or a DBQ about slavery, there was some elements of anti-slavery in some state constitutions. Of course, we all read about Thomas Jefferson and how he tried to include in the DOI some slavery remarks. which the South had taken out. Massachusetts, in 1783, they had a slave who sued on the basis that all men were created equal, and he was freed as a result of that. So we've got some issues there where we have people, some states taking a stance against slavery. All right. Let's talk about the Continental Congress. I apologize for my chicken scratch. The Continental Congress, pretty important group here. In 1777, there's a proposal for the Articles of Confederation. Which were ratified in 1781. What was the thing that kind of held these up from the articles from being? Yeah, John?
Western land claims.
Yeah, Western land claims, right? We had Virginia claiming land in Wisconsin. What the crap? Some of them thought that their western boundary extended all the way to the Pacific Ocean, which was an issue. And so the two states that had to kind of come into the fold were New York and Virginia, and they did. They gave up part of that, part of their claim in order to have some unity. Until it was ratified, we had the Continental Congress governing. Governing the U.S. This group of men lost power as the war progressed. We had a lot of the talented individuals who were there left, and they went back to their home states. Some of the successes here during this time. We have obviously an army, a navy, Marines that are all constructed during this time. They appointed George Washington. This Continental Congress did. They appointed George Washington to head up the army. They supplied the army, so they were very successful in their attempts to essentially win the war. Their failures included financing the war. How are you going to pay for it? It's a good idea to have independence, but now we have to pay for it. Also, there was issues with taxes being optional, so that hurt the financial part. Money was worthless. The saying "not worth a continental" came out during this time. So that was also an issue. All right. Before we talk about the Articles of Confederation, I want to talk about some of the problems that were afflicting America in the 1780s. Now, this is in your book, I believe, Fast Track to 5, if I read it correctly today, or if I'm just delusional. So, problems in America, 1780s. Okay, the first one was that we had an infant manufacturing sector that had a hard time and was really adversely affected, by Great Britain's practice of flooding the American market with British goods. So our manufacturers couldn't keep up with the competition from Great Britain. We also had an issue with infrastructure. What's infrastructure mean, Cohen? Do you remember? Yeah, like roads, bridges, all that kind of good stuff. You bet that was an issue. And the reason why it was an issue is that they had all been neglected. So the transportation system was essentially not usable, and so it was very difficult for commerce and trade to be able to ship out goods. We also had an issue of inflation, which was rampant during this time because there was an absence of uniform currency. So basically you go from one bank to another, and what might be valued at $100 for one bank might not be recognized as $100 for another bank, and so it became an issue. Notes are often given at an arbitrary value by private banks and state banks, and so this had a direct impact on business transactions within a state and between states. While we're on the topic of inflation, your textbook, your Fast Track to 5, talks about the want for inflation, okay? And here's why inflation, people who are in debt want inflation. If I borrow something for, say I take out a $10,000 loan, right? I have to pay that off over 30 years. If I start out making $2,000 a year, that loan is pretty intimidating, right? Because it's $10,000, I got to pay it off over 30 years, but I have to pay for my house, I have to pay for food, I have to pay for everything else. The reason why inflation is helpful to people who have debt is because this debt is going to stay the same no matter what, right? You'll have some interest you have to pay for it, correct? But that $10,000 principal is that $10,000 principal. So if inflation occurs and say all of a sudden the value of the dollar goes down, and I am now making after 10 years, or after 4 years, say inflation just skyrockets, and now I'm making $8,000 a year, is that loan going to be easy to pay off, do you think? Absolutely, right? Because I'll have more, and the percentage of how much money I spend on food, on my, I guess, any kind of supplies that I might need, the percentages will probably stay the same, but that means that the percentage of money that I have available to pay off the loan will also increase. Or excuse me, the percentage of money that I had to pay off the loan might increase, or might stay the same. I got this right? You guys following me here? The percentage of money that I have available to pay off the loan when I budget out stuff from my household is probably going to stay the same, but because I have more money, there's going to be more money in that percentage of the pie. Does that make sense? So I'll be able to pay off that loan quicker. So that's why people like inflation. That's why farmers wanted inflation. So they can pay off these loans easier. All right. And that was all in your book. Interstate trade. There's another key thing here. Interstate trade was adversely affected by state trade barriers and a vast assortment of currencies. So it was adversely affected by states had barriers set into place where they would tax if you were trading from within states, and because there were different currencies from state to state, it was tough to have a fair trade. Or one that people both wanted to partake in. Last one I have here is that the government had kind of had their hands tied when it came to dealing with the depression that struck following the war. Okay? We good on that? All right. So that's the Continental Congress. Now let's talk about the AOC. Of course, ratified in 1781. We can't talk about the AOC without talking about their failures. Okay, so that's what we're going to focus on. What's up, John? What was number 3? You're right, John. Is that better? Are you happy now? You gonna be okay? All right.
You're really going down the tube.
John, I'm gonna turn the camera off here in about 10 seconds.
Why? Why would you do that?
Because I don't want to have any video evidence. I'm just joking. All right. I gotta watch what I say here. Well, she can see it. All right. It's right here. All right. Here we go. Let's talk about the Unicameral Legislature. That was a problem with the AOC. What's a unicameral legislature? One house of Congress, right? We have 2 houses right now. We have a House of Representatives and a Senate. Our state it models that as well. I think Nebraska has a unicameral legislature for their state.
They're the only state that has that.
Yeah, I believe so.
Did you just look that up?
No, I just knew that.
Yeah. So it makes it difficult to get stuff through, and it's really on just that house to generate ideas. So if you have a few states that band together and they don't want to have anything done, it's pretty tough to get stuff moving. There was also no authority to tax. Congress has 0 authority to tax under the Articles of Confederation.
Did they just forget that?
No, they didn't want to have, remember, this is stemming from a time in which we have people who are really skeptical about the government and having to deal with taxes, and we had just had a big revolt about taxes. And so I think that's partially by design here. They wanted to leave as much independence to the states as possible. They really were very cognizant of the fact that people did not like a tyrannical government, a large government bossing them around, and so they kind of went to the extreme of not giving any money or not giving any powers to the national government. So along with that, there's 1 vote in Congress for each state. I believe they had to have 9 votes in order to pass a bill. 9 out of 13 had to pass it. And then from there you had all 13 had to agree to any kind of an amendment. So if one group said no, it was very difficult to get stuff passed through. There was no national court system. No national currency.
Ooh.
Because they just got done being a king, there was no executive. And we talked about already how 9 of 13 needed to approve the passage of certain legislation, and all 14 had to agree on any amendments. All right? Any questions on that from anybody? All right. Another big thing here I want to write down is letter G. which is Congress could not regulate interstate or foreign commerce. No regulation authority. So they couldn't regulate either interstate or foreign commerce. So that was an issue. Anybody have any questions on those failures? All right. The bad news was first. Let's talk about the AOC success. Because even though they get a bad rap, there were some bright spots here. The first one is kind of a no-brainer here, but they set a precedence. A precedent. Precedence. We have something to work with. That's how you spell precedent, John.
E-R-E-C.
We should use that word for a bell ringer.
All right. Precedent. Yes. Do you guys know what that word means? It means something that precedes something else, so that you have an idea, a framework, something that you can work with in the future. Okay. John thinks it's spelled with an S, and he's checking on your spell check right now, but he's wrong. Nice try, John. That's what you get. All right. The land ordinance of 1785 was also an important success here. What we have here is we have townships that are formed. Speaking of townships, our village just let out the old noon bell here, right? Cool. Townships are formed in 6 miles square, and they would be surveyed. Now, 6 square miles is how many, or 6 miles square is how many square miles? 36, right? Sirens are going on.
It's noon.
They do that for the week?
Every day.
Oh. I didn't. Very good. Way to be on top of it, man.
Well, they did just start doing that. Well, it is
Okay.
bad weather.
Gotta compose here. All right.
They
All right.
didn't
Back here. Okay. So the townships, 6 miles square, they'd be surveyed. Sections. They would sell sections. A section is 640 acres. And when they sold them, they'd be sold for no less than $1 an acre. This pleased speculators. The average person did not have $640 cash available, so they couldn't get a loan. So this was definitely something that land speculators were able to take advantage of. 640 acres. Remember to $1 per acre, so it pleased land speculators. And of course, I believe it was the 15th or 16th section. What was it? 16th section from every township. The sale of that section went to funding public education. And why this is important is because it, again, sets the precedence of the government funding education, the federal government funding education. So if you're wondering why we pay for schools, talk to the people back in 1785. All right? Talk to Doc Brown about getting in the DeLorean and going back to the future. All right. Also a success here. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 was important. I'm going to adjust this over just a little bit. There we go. Couple of reasons as to why this act passed. The first one here is that landlocked states they had a fear at this time, and their fear was that basically the other states that had a western boundary into what was unsettled territory would get too big. Fear. The fear.
That kind of did happen. Like, you look at the states on the map, and they're all just get bigger.
And part of that is, though, because of when they organized the territories, they want to try to get into statehood. And we talked about that with the Civil War, trying to get these large areas into statehood to either support before or against slavery. All right? And they're still sparsely populated compared to the rest of the East Coast. All right? All right. So there was some debate about paying off war debts. If they sold this land, it would be an easy way to pay off war debts. Some states feared that there's going to be too much representation here from the smaller states, and so Maryland initially refused the land ordinance, or the Northwest Ordinance, excuse me, and they lead this protest against. Maryland was upset with these larger states potentially getting too much land. Actually, I might have this switched around. But anyway, Maryland, they lead a protest here, and so Virginia finally gives land claims to the federal government. That's the catalyst here. But and your book talks about New York being as well, right? VA gives up land. Others soon followed once Virginia did. The land then that was claimed was sold to pay off debt. Yeah.
What's a catalyst?
A catalyst is something that gets started. Like gas is a catalyst for fire. Helps to get it going. All right. There's also the Out-of-State Plan, which is part of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Actually, guys, I'm going to erase this right here. I have my Northwest Ordinances mixed up a little bit. The Out-of-State Plan was part of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Somebody do me a Northwest Ordinance. Add a state plan. AT, look up Northwest Ordinance real quick on Google.
It says 1787.
I know, I'm just double checking here.
Wait, what's the first
How many
one?
were there? Yeah, was it just the one?
I thought one of them got shot down.
Was it 1786 or 85? What's that? Part of 87? Okay.
Looks like it was
Just the one?
Yeah.
Was it,
Once it reached.
there were land ordinances in 1784, right? Because your book, your Fast Track to 5 talks about that.
There was one of those.
Oh, okay, I'm just making sure that I'm right there. I didn't want to give any false or misleading, Any bad information, you guys?
Once the population reaches 60,000, the Constitution will be written in territory.
Yeah, basically, so what the add-a-state plan does is it's 5,000 people to become a territory, and then you get a governor who's appointed by the federal government, and they can start to make an assembly within that territory, and they can send a delegate to Congress to just kind of represent the territory. And then from there, you have, once you get to 60,000 people, you can become a state. 60, yep. Now, one of the things we talk about when we look at why these western states are so long, okay, is because if you look at Colorado, Wyoming, they're all wide, right? They're not very tall. And the reason why is because most of the populations were all on the eastern side, and they just kept on moving west, 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 west. So by making them long, they can include anybody who had settled west in the area. But if they were to make them tall, you wouldn't have as many states to be able to etch out. Does that make sense or no? Yes? Okay.
Yeah, Colorado. They're kind of like squares.
Well, I'm like Nebraska. Okay, so Kansas is like this. Nebraska is long as well, right? Correct? Everybody follow me here? Okay, and the reason why these states are more wide than they are tall is because people settled in this area of the state. So if they were to make the state out of 60,000 people, they could have made just one state right here to make it long, but then this area would have taken forever to become a state. Capiche? You're right. Wyoming's more of a square, Jack. So is Colorado. I'm sorry. Oh, man. All right. Okay. We good? All right. Also part of the Northwest Ordinance was no slaves in the territories. Of course, the Northwest Ordinance creates states like Ohio, Wisconsin, like Michigan. And I've already told you guys why the Upper Peninsula, which looks like it would be a natural extension of Wisconsin, is not part of Wisconsin. Do you guys know why that is? Why is it, Cohen?
Was it because that Ohio wanted that little piece with like
Toledo. You bet, right?
And then for say okay, Michigan is be quiet, they just
Yep.
You're also supposed to have Chicago, so you're supposed to have down to
Yeah, on the bottom of the lake, yeah. And that was part of all those agreements. So, yeah.
That's real.
Well, I don't know if that was the same agreement, but that was, yeah.
Chicago and
But again, we talk about major areas, right? We have Milwaukee, we've got Chicago. If we have those in the same state, would Illinois become a state as easily?
No.
Probably not, right? I mean, they have Springfield.
And Barack Obama was the first president.
There you go.
Oh, there we go.
Well, not really.
He's from Hawaii.
The first president.
Oh, now we got, okay, I don't want to get in any birther discussions here,
Yeah.
folks. All right, we're not going there right now.
Born in Hawaii.
We're not going there. Okay. The other success here of the AOC was we have peace with England. We good? Everybody got those down? Okay, I'm going to erase here. We're going to go again.
Wait. Top left. Yeah.
We good?
Yeah, I'm good.
It's fine, John.
No, but he missed this spot in the top left corner. Look. He did.
All right, here we go.
Now that you pointed out, it's gonna bother me. Exactly.
Still in chapter 4.
Now I got it.
Yeah, still in chapter 4, man.
Why don't you go up there and bring us?
No, last time I got her in my city, I got yelled at. I was trying to give everyone a cookie.
Yeah, don't get out of your seat.
What a sad day, Colin.
Catalyst for change here. Catalyst for change.
So when you say your ordinance,
The S right there, catalyst. So what are some of the reasons as to why the Articles of Confederation need to be changed? Well, the first one here, your FTT5 talks about is Franklin. Good old Daniel Boone, right? This was started by a group of squatters who were denied statehood in what is now the Tennessee area. And remember, we had issues with England after the war because we weren't compensating people for their the Tories for land loss. We also had issues with Spain. And there was the Yazoo Strip in Florida that we had issues with. And so Spain, who had allies in the West with the Native Americans, tried to get this area of Franklin to kind of turn and to kind of go with Spain. It ends up falling apart. Not that the U.S. intervened at all, but it demonstrated the fact that had there been a war, what did we rely on? The states to send troops, and we're hoping that that's going to be the case, that they would do it, but we don't have any absolute proof that they would have been able to produce something to help in this war against Spain. There's also wars with Spain down in Georgia and the Native Americans in 1785, right? Okay, another problem here was English soldiers who were sticking around in the Northwest Territory. There was zero ability, again, for the Articles to raise an army, and so that was a problem. Shays Rebellion, which took place in 1787. Fast Track to 5 outlines what happens with that, but basically these debtors, these farmers, were put into prison because they had debts, and so there was issues with them. They wanted to have stay laws passed that they could just stay on their farms and try to work off their debts. 1786, Shays Rebellion. Your book talks about that. Should I reset here and do the whole thing, or can we just go with it? We're good? All right.
That's what it was on the key dates and figures, so.
Fair enough. What does the book say, 1787 or 86? 86? I must have had a typo. Oh, no. Oh, no. All right.
Wait, 17.
Remember, the debtors here, the farmers wanted inflation to help pay off their debts. The bankers wanted deflation, because the same is true if you owe $10,000 to the bank and you go from making $2,000 a year to $1,500 a year. The value of money increases and that $10,000 gets bigger, and so those bankers are making more money on their loans. The Shays Rebellion ends up becoming, again, I'll use that word catalyst, for the Constitutional Convention. Now, your Fast Track to 5 talks about, I think it's the Annapolis Conference, right? And where's the other conference at that they tried to have before the Philadelphia? What is it? Alexandria, okay. Basically, a couple of things that kind of lead besides Shays Rebellion here. We have Constitutional Convention. We have a post-war depression. Another important thing here is Thomas Jefferson, who says, look, you know, this Shays Rebellion thing is part of this post-war depression, and, you know, a little rebellion is not a bad thing every once in a while. Keeps the government on its toes, make sure that they're not stepping out of line. And Shays himself, he ends up being pardoned. And of course, with all of these things that occur here, these issues that we have and the weakness of the Articles of Confederation, we end up with number 7 here, which is the Constitutional Convention, which takes place in Philadelphia. All right, 55 delegates. Everybody but Rhode Island, I believe, attends. Washington, George Washington, is the person who's put in charge to preside over this deal. Of course, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams are both gone. We've got Sam Adams, who's a little, was it Sam Adams? Who's the other guy? Was it, said they smelled a rat. What? Patrick Henry, right? So we have some of our patriots from the Revolutionary War who refuse to attend because they're afraid that there's going to be too much power given to the national government. And so there's a couple of key things we have to know about the Constitutional Convention. They meet initially to revise the articles, and they've turned out later on, you know what, we just got to get rid of them altogether. And so they create this whole new document, which is now our current Constitution of the United States of America. Some of the key things here we have the Virginia Plan, which was initially set up here. This was a large state plan talking about the legislative branch. Remember, everybody liked the legislative branch the most. That's why it's the first article of the Constitution. That's why it's the longest article of the Constitution, because they felt that it was the direct way in which people could get together and control the government. If there was too much power in the executive or judicial branch, that was a bad thing for our founding fathers, all right? The framers. The framers. We have to make sure we refer to the people who are at the Constitutional Convention. They're framers of the Constitution. They helped to establish it. People like John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, people like Patrick Henry, who were not there, they're still considered to be founders of our country because they were part of the American Revolution. There was also another plan, which was the New Jersey Plan. This was a small state plan in which every state would receive equal representation, 1 vote in Congress. Now, I believe, if I have this right from the textbook, was New Jersey a unicameral and Virginia was a bicameral, but I believe both houses were based on equal representation, or were based on size of the state with the Virginia plan. And so we get the Great Compromise. It takes place during this time. This is actually the New Jersey Compromise / Great Compromise. It sets, or no, I'm sorry, not New Jersey, the Connecticut Compromise. Connecticut Compromise, there we go. Connecticut Compromise sets up a bicameral legislature, meaning how many houses? 2. If it's a tricameral, how many houses are there?
3.
What about a quadcameral?
It's got to be 4.
A pentacameral?
Probably 5.
I can keep on going, but I don't know any more. I don't know any more of the prefixes there.
Hexacameral, septacameral.
Octacameral, the och. All right.
Dodecahedron cameral.
Bicameral legislature. There's the one that's based off of proportion, which is the House of Representatives, and one that's based off of equal representation, which is the Senate. Now, remember, initially the Senate is. And up until, I think, what amendment is the popular election of senators? 17, right? So not until right around the 1900s that we have, the 20th century, that we actually have popular election of senators. The state representatives elect the senators up until that point. But that's equal representation. All money bills is kind of a trade-off here because it's money and more people and more in state, or there's more people in these larger states, and the larger states are going to be having to bear a brunt of the cost just based off population. All money bills start in the House of Representatives with the Great Compromise. Another key aspect here was the 3/5 Compromise. Which of course was based off of slaves. Slave states wanted to count all of their slaves as citizens. Northern states said, no way, Jose, that's ridiculous. They're not even considered citizens. They're your chattel property. And so the 3/5 compromise essentially says that all slaves count as 3/5 of a person. Exactly. But when it comes to politics and getting more power, hey, there'll be people then, right?
Yeah, we'll use you guys.
So, like, what 3/5 of the person are they using?
Haiti. That's disgusting.
Hit him. Permission to strike Andrew.
There's also the Commerce Compromise, which deals with regulating trade and commerce. Now, in this compromise, the South, they agreed to federal control over foreign and interstate trade. So the South said, yeah, you can have foreign control, or you can have the federal government can have control over foreign and interstate trade. Part of the trade-off here with the South agreeing to this is that they would extend the slave trade. It would not end for another 20 years, so they could have importation of slaves up until 1808. I have 1808 right here.
Well, that's probably what it is.
I think it's 1808.
You're probably right.
Am I right, John? Thanks. Thanks, man. Thanks for having my back, John. All right. And then, of course, the last part of the Commerce Compromise is that the federal government can tax any imports. So anything that we have coming in, they can tax. But if you send something overseas, they won't tax you for it. All right? So they're not going to get in your way of sending goods overseas to try to make money. Now, other countries can have an import tax as well, right? But they're not going to tax you for shipping stuff overseas. No export tax. No export tax. All right. Let's talk about hesitancy to ratify. I've got two more, guys, so just bear with me here. Anti-Federalists believe the states should have more power. The Federalists believe in a strong executive, and they think it's necessary. And so we have the Federalist Papers that try to convince New York and Virginia. Rhode Island's the last to ratify. And of course, part of the deal here is the Bill of Rights. Citizens' rights to prevent an oppressive government. This thing is ratified, the Constitution is ratified in 1789. The Bill of Rights is added in 1791 as part of a deal that was brokered between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists wanted it because they wanted to guarantee that citizens' rights would not be taken away from the federal government, and so that's kind of the trade-off here. We'll pass it as long as you add amendments here 2 years later. All right? Nice job today, folks.